Hey everybody, so in this video we're going to start talking about section 2.3, which is about graphing using base graphs and transformations. Okay, we did already talk about the base graphs that we're going to use and their key points. Okay, and then we also talked about graphing using a single transformation. Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about graphing using more than one transformation. Okay, so let's look at an example first. Okay. So we'll start with an example that we're familiar with, which is the x squared base graph. Okay. All right. So I want to remind you that everything inside the main function, right? So inside of the x squared part is going to be an x transformation. Okay. So for us here, our x transformation is going to be this -1, which we know moves the graph to the right one. Okay. And then everything outside of the base function, like this +2, is going to be our y transformations. Okay. So this +2 is going to move the graph up 2. Okay. So let's look at our graph. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is draw our base graph and mark our key points. Okay. So here's our 3 key points, and here's our base graph. Okay. So this is the base graph. Okay, which is y equals x squared. Okay. Now we're going to draw, okay, with transformations. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do, okay, is my x transformation, which is right 1. Okay, so I'm going to take everything from my base graph and I'm going to move it right 1. Okay, so I'll take my key point, move it right 1, take the vertex key point and move it right 1, and take this key point and move it right 1. Okay, so that is just like we've done before. Okay, and now I'm going to do my second step. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to do my second transformation, which is up 2. Okay, so I'm going to take this graph and I'm going to move everything up 2. So I'm going to take my key point that was here and I'm going to move it up 1, 2. Okay, I'm going to take my vertex key point that was here and move it up 1, 2. Okay, and then last thing, I'm going to take my key point that was here and move it up 1, 2. Okay, and then I'm going to draw in my shape. Okay, so you can see that you just do one step at a time, right? Base graph, first transformation, second transformation. Okay, let's do another example like this. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is list our base graph and transformations. Okay, so our base graph here is going to be y equals absolute value of x. Okay, our transformations are going to come from this negative sign and from this +2. Okay, so So anything inside the base function, which is the square root, so anything, or I mean the absolute value, so anything inside the absolute value, like this plus 2, is going to be an x transformation. Okay, so this is going to move it left 2. Okay, and then anything that is outside of the absolute value, like this minus sign, is going to be a y transformation, and this is going to reflect. Okay. Remember, it will reflect the y coordinates, right, meaning across the x-axis. Okay. So let's look at a graph here. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is look at our base graph. Okay. Our absolute value graph that looks like this, right? It is V-shaped. Okay, so this is our base graph, y equals absolute value x. Okay, then we're going to look at our first transformation. Okay, which was left 2. Okay. Okay, so we're going to take all of our key points and move them left 2. So we're going to take this point, move it left 2. We'll take the vertex, move it left 2. And we'll take this key point and move it left 2. Okay. Then we'll draw in our shape. Okay. And now we're going to look at our second step. Right? Our second transformation, which remember was reflect across the x-axis. Okay. So we're going to take each of our key points and reflect them. Okay, so we'll take this key point, which was right here, and we'll reflect it across. We'll take this key point. When it reflects, it stays the same. And then this key point will reflect it down. So this key point, which was here, will reflect down. Okay. And here's our new graph. Okay. So it's both shifted and reflected. Okay. So now that we've done a couple examples of just doing these step by step, the question comes up, does it matter what order you do the transformations? Okay, so here's my my information about ordering these. Okay. So for me, it's a good idea okay, but it won't necessarily give you the wrong answer if you don't do this, okay, to separate x and y transformations. Okay, so it makes sense to do all of the x ones first or all of the y ones first. Okay, now this is just something that can help you keep focused on what you're doing and keep you from making silly mistakes. Okay, it's not necessary to get the right answer to do this. This is just my tip for staying organized. Okay, now what is important is that for for y transformations, okay, you do okay, you follow the order of operations. Okay, so you would do multiplication first. Okay, Okay, so we know that in order of operations, we do multiplication first and then add and subtract later on, right? So in terms of transformations that come from multiplication, this is going to be stretch or reflect, okay? And then add and subtract, this is going to be shift, okay? So you have to do these types of transformations before this one, okay? And then for the X operations, oops, this is step 3. Okay, you use reverse order of operations. Okay, so you would do add and subtract first, okay, and then multiplication. Okay, so you would first have the shift, okay, and then you would have stretch or reflect. Okay. All right, so let's look at an example where, now this doesn't cause an issue with the first 2 examples that we did, by the way, because we only had one transformation for each variable. Okay, so it was okay to do those in any order. Let's do an example where the order does matter. Okay. Okay. So we're going to do y equals minus 2 times the absolute value. I guess we'll do plus 2. Sorry, we'll do plus 2 times the absolute value of x minus 1 plus 1. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is determine our base graph. Okay, so for us, that's the square root function. Okay. Okay, and then we're going to list our x and y transformations. Okay, so remember the x transformations are going to come from the inside of the square root. So if we look inside the square root, all we have is this minus 1, which we know is going to move the graph right 1. Okay, then the outside transformations are going to affect y. So we have this plus 1 and this times 2. Okay, so remember the times 2 is going to go first. Okay, so this is going to stretch the y coordinates by 2. Okay, and then this plus 1 is going to move it up 1. Okay, so I'm just going to number these so we know what order we're doing them in. Okay, so we're going to do this one first. I like to do my x transformations first. You are welcome to do the y ones first. Okay, but what's important is that we are doing the stretch before we do the shift on the y transformations. Okay, so let's look at a graph. One, two, three, 4. Okay, so here's my base graph. Y equals root x. Okay, so let's look at our first step, which was move the graph right 1. Okay, so we're going to move the graph right 1. Okay, so we're going to take all of our key points and we're going to move them right 1. So we'll move the graph end to the right 1. We'll move this first, or the second key point over 1. Okay. Okay, so here's our old key point and we're going to move it to the right 1. Okay. There we go. Okay, so our first step, move the graph right 1. Okay. So now let's look at step 2, right? Or the second transformation. Okay, which we said our second transformation was going to be stretch the y coordinates okay, by 2. Okay, so we're going to look at the y coordinates here. Okay, so it doesn't affect the x part at all. So my first key point is still going to be at 1. Okay, and then I'm going to multiply my y coordinate by 2. So 0 times 2 is 0. Okay, then I'm going to move to my second key point, which was here. My x part stays the same. My y part is going to multiply by 2. Okay, so 1 times 2 is 2. Okay, 1, 2. Oops, this was at 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. Okay, so this is where my key point was. Okay, now I'm going to multiply the y coordinate by 2. So 2 times 2 is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and here's my stretched graph. Okay, so you can see that the x part of the key points is all the same, and the y part is multiplied by 2. Okay, and then I'm going to look at my last step. Okay. Okay, and remember our last step was to move it up 1. Okay, so I'm just going to take all of my key points and move them up 1. Okay, so this key point that was here, I'm going to move it up 1. Okay. This key point that was here, I'm going to move it up 1. Okay. And this key point was at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so it was here. I'm going to move it up 1. Okay, so this would be my new graph. Okay, and this is the graph of the function that you're asked about, right? Y equals 2 square root of x minus 1 plus 1. Okay. All right. Let's do one more graph like this. Oh, I don't want to use the same transformations. Sorry, I was just looking at my other example. Okay, so we'll use okay. All right, so my base graph is going to be y equals x cubed. Okay, and then let's look at our transformations. So our x transformations are going to be things that are inside the cube, and our y transformations are going to be things that are outside of the cube. So there's actually nothing in here, so there are no x transformations. Okay, and then my y transformations are going to be this minus and this plus 2. Okay, so we're going to do the minus first, so this is going to be reflect. Okay, that goes first. Okay, and then my plus 2 is going to move it up 2. Okay, and I do need to do them in the right order. Okay, so let's look at our graphs. Okay, so my base graph, y equals x cubed, has these key points, okay, and this shape. All right, now my first step is going to be to reflect. Okay, so I'm going to reflect across the x-axis. Okay, so I'm going to take all of my key points, which you can see over here, and I'm going to reflect them. So this key point that was going to be here reflects up here. Okay, the center is on the axis of reflection, so it doesn't move, and this one is going to reflect down here. Okay, so it's going to give me this shape. Okay, and then my second step was up 2. Okay, so I'm going to take that graph that we just looked at, and I'm going to move it up 2. Okay, so here's my key points, and I'm going to move them all up 2. So I'll take this one, move it up 1, 2. Okay, take this key point, move it up 1, 2. Okay, and take this key point and move it up 1, 2. Okay, and then draw in the shape of my base graph. Okay. All right, that's all the examples we're going to do in this video. In the next video, we will do some more examples, so I'll see you guys soon.